Welcome to AI Podcast. Today we'll discuss the most important current affairs from the Hindu 19 May 2026 edition with detailed analysis for UPSC aspirants. And, we often think of global events as these isolated phenomena.
Right, like they're just happening in a vacuum.
Exactly. Like a butterfly flapping its wings in a distant forest. It's an interesting concept, but you don't really expect to feel the wind from it in your living room.
Yeah.
We assume a geopolitical crisis thousands of miles away is just, well, news on a screen.
Yeah, completely disconnected from our daily lives.
But today's deep dive is really about pulling back the curtain on why that assumption is just completely broken. We're looking at a stack of sources that reveal a staggering level of global interconnectivity.
It's a deeply complex, almost invisible web. When you start pulling on one thread, say global shipping routes, you suddenly find it's connected to national defense strategies, agriculture subsidies, and even basic civil liberties.
Right. Our mission today is to show you exactly how a conflict across the ocean can directly dictate the cost of your grocery bill, whether there's fuel in your car, and how constitutional laws are interpreted right here at home.
Vulnerability in one sector basically forces a massive adaptation in another.
So let's jump right into the macro picture and look at where that vulnerability starts. We hear West Asia crisis, and it is incredibly easy to just tune out if you aren't a geopolitical analyst.
Oh, absolutely.
But you brought in this new report from the International Labor Organization, the ILO, that outlines a direct pipeline from military conflict to your personal livelihood.
Yeah, that is the crucial takeaway here.
Okay.
The ILO report maps out exactly why you cannot afford to look away. They are warning that this specific crisis in West Asia is threatening 38 million full-time jobs globally.
38 million jobs just from regional instability in one part of the world.
Exactly. And the primary mechanism driving that is fuel. What's really fascinating here is how they model the ripple effect.
How does that actually work?
Well, if the disruption in the Strait of Hormuz causes oil prices to climb by 50% above their early 2026 average,
Which is very plausible.
highly plausible, if that happens, global hours worked could fall by 0.5%. That translates to an additional 5 million unemployed people globally.
Wow.
Higher energy costs immediately choke transport routes. That pressures manufacturing supply chains, which, compresses profit margins and eventually leads to mass layoffs. It also just decimates rural livelihoods in countries that depend heavily on imported fertilizers.
Okay, let's unpack this for India specifically, because the numbers we are seeing in the trade data right now are frankly eye-watering.
Yeah, they are.
India's merchandise trade deficit just hit a record $333 billion. Just to put that massive number in perspective, our imports are sitting at $775 billion, while our exports have remained completely stagnant at $442 billion. We are just hemorrhaging foreign exchange.
It is a gaping hole in the national balance sheet, and I think it explains the unprecedented messaging we are seeing from the Prime Minister's office right now.
The austerity plea, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
He recently made a very public plea for citizens to implement personal austerity measures. He suggested delaying gold purchases, cutting back on edible oil consumption, and even avoiding unnecessary foreign travel.
Which is an incredible thing to hear. You rarely hear a government actively ask citizens to stop buying things.
Right.
But then you look at the consumer data, gold imports in April 2026 alone were up 82%. People are looking at global volatility and hedging their bets by buying physical gold.
But by doing so, they are actively draining the national wallet. And that drain exposes our deepest structural vulnerability, which is energy. This brings us to the SPR problem, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve.
I love a good analogy, and the SPR is essentially a nation's household emergency fund. When your paycheck suddenly stops, how long can you survive on the savings in your bank account?
That's a great way to put it.
For the United States, they have 400 million barrels of oil sitting in underground salt caverns. That gives them about 20 days of uninterrupted cover. China has built up a massive 900 million barrels. But India, we currently have between 36.7 and 39 million barrels. That barely covers 7 days of consumption. But I have to push back here. We've known about this vulnerability since the massive 1991 oil shock.
Oh, yeah. For decades.
Why are we still living paycheck to paycheck with our energy reserves?
Because it's a colossal failure of long-term infrastructure investment. Building underground storage, particularly for liquefied natural gas and LPG, requires immense capital and highly specialized engineering.
It's not just digging a hole in the ground.
Not at all. For decades, policymakers have essentially gambled that the global supply chains would just hold up, allowing us to buy fuel just in time off the global market.
But now, with Iran's near closure of the Strait of Hormuz, that gamble is failing.
Right. And the real-world impact is happening as we speak.
Let's look at that immediate domestic fallout. Transporters are currently reporting diesel shortages, and truck movement is literally being choked across several pockets in India because the oil marketing companies, the OMCs, are rationing fuel.
And the mechanism behind that rationing is a massive pricing distortion. The global price of crude is spiking due to the conflict, but those OMCs cannot simply pass that increased cost onto the consumer at the pump.
Because if they did, the retail price of diesel would skyrocket overnight. That makes the cost of transporting essential goods like tomatoes and wheat skyrocket, triggering runaway inflation and massive political fallout.
Exactly.
So the government effectively caps the retail price to protect the consumer.
Precisely. But that means the OMCs are eating the difference. Currently, they're losing about 100 rupees on every single liter of diesel sold.
Wow.
They can't sustain those losses, so they throttle the supply. And that ripple effect hits the agricultural sector next. Because natural gas is a crucial feedstock for manufacturing fertilizers, India's fertilizer subsidy bill for 2026-27 is projected to surge by an additional 70,000 crore rupees.
That is massive.
The total bill could hit a staggering 2.41 lakh crore rupees. That is over two-thirds of the entire agriculture budget.
Which is a tragic irony. We are bleeding money to import urea, but throwing more subsidies at the problem isn't actually helping the farmers in the long run.
No, it creates what agronomists call a fertilizer trap. The more synthetic urea you use, the more you degrade the soil's natural organic matter.
Right.
That degraded soil then forces the farmer to use even more urea the next season just to achieve the exact same yield. The solution isn't just securing cheaper natural gas from the Middle East, it's changing the biology of our farming. We need fertilizer use efficiency.
Meaning going back to the agricultural basics, like moving away from monocultures and returning to crop rotations.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
Specifically shifting back to pulse cereal crop rotations.
Mm-hmm.
Pulses like lentils and chickpeas are leguminous plants.
They fix their own nitrogen, right?
Yeah, they have a symbiotic relationship with bacteria in their root nodules that biologically fix atmospheric nitrogen directly into the soil. They require a tiny fraction of the synthetic urea that heavy-feeding cereals like rice and wheat do.
Okay, so if we financially incentivize farmers to grow pulses, we naturally cut our dependence on imported fossil fuels.
Bingo.
It's incredible when you trace it all the way back. The solution to a global oil crisis and a ballooning trade deficit isn't just building bigger oil tanks, it's planting lentils.
It really is.
But since we cannot completely farm our way out of a macroeconomic crisis, and India certainly can't control global oil prices or wars, the government is aggressively moving to de-risk the future through strategic alliances.
That is the natural progression. If your supply chains are vulnerable, you forge new shields.
Huh.
Let's look at the recent India-Norway Green Strategic Partnership.
Okay.
Prime Minister Modi recently met with Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this isn't just a standard diplomatic photo op. It's a defensive alliance built on green technology.
I noticed Støre used some very specific, sharp language during that meeting. He explicitly warned against countries that weaponize diplomacy, trade, and technology. That's clearly aimed at the current geopolitical climate, particularly the leverage held by nations like Russia and China.
Absolutely. Norway recognizes the threat, and they have immense capital and cutting-edge technology,
Right.
particularly in green shipping and alternative energy supplies.
And India brings the scale.
Exactly. India has the manufacturing scale, the demographic speed, and an insatiable market. By combining forces, they are aiming to generate $100 billion in investment and create 1 million jobs in India, effectively bypassing those traditional fossil fuel bottlenecks.
And speaking of bypassing traditional models, the pivot happening with South Korea right now is equally massive. It feels like we are moving way beyond the old buyer-seller dynamic of just writing a check and importing weapons from foreign powers.
Oh, we are witnessing a fundamental shift toward joint innovation in the India-South Korea defense tie.
Oh.
We started with co-producing the K9 Vajra T artillery guns, but now the discussions are moving toward highly sensitive technologies.
Like what?
Like deep-sea conventional submarines, military-grade lithium-ion batteries, and even integration into their advanced KF-21 fighter jet program.
Let me play devil's advocate for a second. South Korea isn't just handing over top-tier submarine and aerospace tech out of the goodness of their hearts. They must have a massive strategic deficit they are trying to plug. Is this tied to their shrinking population?
You've hit the nail on the head. South Korea is facing a severe demographic cliff. Their population is rapidly aging and shrinking, which means their pool of military recruits is drying up.
They literally won't have the people to man the ships.
They literally cannot sustain a massive conventional military force in the long term. So strategic convergence with India, a country with a massive youthful demographic, an enormous industrial market, and a crucial geographic position in the Indo-Pacific is a matter of absolute national security for Seoul.
That makes perfect sense. They bring the advanced proprietary tech, we bring the industrial scale and the geography. And I was thrilled to see that it's not just massive governments making these moves.
Right, the private sector is jumping in.
Yeah, 9 Indian space tech startups companies like Astrogate and Druva Space just traveled to Italy under the Iron Space delegation. They are signing partnerships for global ground station as a service infrastructure.
This is a vital piece of the interconnectivity puzzle. Let's break down what ground station as a service, or GSaaS, actually means, because it is revolutionizing space economics.
It's basically ending the need for massive satellite dishes, right?
Historically, if you launched a satellite, you also had to build and maintain a massive, expensive physical antenna on the ground just to communicate with it and download your data.
Which means your satellite is practically useless when it's orbiting over the opposite side of the planet unless you have the capital to build antennas everywhere.
Exactly. But GSaaS changes that paradigm entirely. It's essentially a cloud computing model, but applied to space communications. A third-party provider builds a global, interconnected network of ground stations, and satellite operators simply rent antenna time by the minute as their satellite passes overhead.
That is so efficient.
Italy has incredible legacy hardware and aerospace infrastructure, but they need the agile, low-cost software and scaling capabilities that Indian startups provide to make this global network viable.
So we are securing our supply chains, our oceans, and literally outer space. But what about securing the mechanics of the state itself? That tension between vulnerability and restructuring brings us to the domestic sphere. And there are two massive developments here. Let's start with the logistical push for simultaneous elections, specifically the 129th Constitution Amendment Bill.
Right.
And as a reminder to our listeners, we aren't taking a political stance on this policy. We're strictly looking at the mechanics. The big conundrum everyone immediately brings up is, what happens if a state government or the central government loses its majority halfway through its 5-year term?
It's the most critical logistical question of the entire proposal. And keeping to the mechanics, as you said, P.P. Chowdhury, the chairman of the Joint Parliamentary Committee on this issue, explained the proposed remainder of the term rule.
How exactly does that rule function in practice?
Well, if a government falls after, say, 2.5 years, a midterm election would indeed be held to form a new government. However, that newly elected government would not get a fresh, full 5-year term.
Oh, I see.
They would only serve for the remaining 2.5 years of that specific election cycle. This ensures that the entire country stays on a synchronized schedule. He also noted historically that India did successfully hold simultaneous elections between 1952 and 1967.
It's a massive structural change to ponder, but here's what gets really interesting on the domestic front. The Supreme Court just handed down a ruling regarding the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, the UAPA, and it included a highly unusual, almost unprecedented moment of self-reproach from the court regarding how anti-terror laws are interpreted.
It was a watershed moment. And again, looking strictly at the legal philosophy here, independent of the specific political activists involved, Justices B.V. Nagaratna and Ujjal Bhuyan issued a judgment that firmly reiterated a core constitutional principle. Bail is the rule, jail is the exception.
And they explicitly noted that this isn't just an empty legal slogan.
Exactly. The court actually expressed serious reservations about its own previous judgment from January, where they denied bail to activists Umar Khalid and Sharjeel Imam. Khalid, for instance, has been in pretrial incarceration for over 5 years without a conviction.
Let me break down why the UAPA is so legally contentious. There is a specific clause, Section 43D5. To use an analogy, imagine a high jump competition where the bar is set basically an inch off the ground.
Okay.
Under this section, the state only needs to show that an accusation looks prima facie, true meaning it just looks plausible on the surface. If the state meets that incredibly low evidentiary bar, the accused can be locked up indefinitely without bail long before a trial even happens to prove their actual guilt. It essentially converts the agonizing delay of the legal process into the punishment itself.
This raises an important question, and it's exactly the constitutional concern Justice Booyan articulated. He warned that while laws designed to protect national security are absolutely necessary, they cannot be allowed to completely invert the constitutional relationship between liberty and detention.
Right, because the presumption of innocence is everything.
It is the absolute cornerstone of the rule of law. If a statute allows the state to bypass personal liberty indefinitely without guaranteeing a speedy trial, the court is arguing that constitutional courts have a duty to step in and melt down the draconian nature of that provision.
It is a profound tension. How do you balance the existential security of the state with the fundamental liberty of the individual? The court is essentially stating that the right to life and liberty under Article 21 always remains supreme, even when weighed against national security statutes.
It is the most delicate, critical balance for any functioning democracy to maintain. If you overcorrect toward security, you risk eroding the very liberties you're trying to protect.
That tension between finding the source of a threat and figuring out how to neutralize it without overreaching is actually playing out in a completely different arena right now. Not in constitutional law, but in ecological security and the fight against global smuggling networks.
The pangolins. This is a fascinating application of technology to solve a global vulnerability.
Yes, the pangolins. They look like little walking pine cones, and tragically, they are one of the most trafficked mammals on the entire planet. Their keratin scales are highly sought after in illegal wildlife markets.
The logistical nightmare for global law enforcement has always been tracing the origin of the crime. If customs authorities seize a massive shipment of scales at an airport in, say, Singapore, how on earth do they know which specific forest in the world the poachers are actually operating in?
Right, because once the scales are dried, processed, and shipped halfway across the world, the DNA inside them is usually completely degraded. It's like trying to read a book where 90% of the pages have been burned.
Yeah.
But conservationists have found a brilliant workaround using advanced genomic mapping.
The science here is incredible. They are now able to extract those tiny, degraded fragments of DNA from the confiscated scales. They take those fragments and cross-reference them against a comprehensive genetic map of living pangolin populations across Asia and Africa.
So even with a tiny degraded sample, they can look at the genetic markers and trace a seized bag of scales back to its exact geographical origin.
Precisely. It allows authorities to stop playing a hopeless game of whack-a-mole at international borders. Instead, they can use the genomic data to identify the exact hotspots and target the specific regions where the poaching syndicates are operating, stopping the vulnerability at the source.
So what does this all mean? If we step back and look at the massive journey we've just taken through these sources, you can clearly see how everything is intimately, undeniably connected.
You really can.
A conflict flares up in West Asia. That threatens to choke the Strait of Hormuz, which immediately exposes India's paltry 7-day oil reserve. That global dynamic spikes the cost of diesel for our local truck drivers and threatens to blow a 70,000 crore rupee hole in our agricultural fertilizer budget.
Which in turn forces our leadership to desperately adapt. We see green tech alliances with Norway to bypass fossil fuels and deep-sea defense partnerships with South Korea to secure the oceans.
All while internally trying to balance massive democratic shifts like simultaneous elections and fiercely debating the constitutional limits of anti-terror laws.
It is a dizzying web of cause and effect.
It really is.
And it leaves us with a final, I think, very provocative thought to ponder. Today, we explored security from multiple angles: energy security, national security, ecological security, and legal security.
Right.
But as the Supreme Court noted with the UAPA, and as the economic data shows with our trade deficit, the tools we build to protect ourselves can sometimes become the very things that make us most vulnerable.
That's a great point.
A law meant to stop terror can threaten basic liberty.
Yeah.
A chemical subsidy meant to feed the nation can destroy the soil. And importing gold to secure personal wealth can destabilize the national currency.
As a citizen, how much personal, economic, or legal friction are you willing to endure in the name of national security? That is the invisible question tying all of this together.
Absolutely.
You can access today's notes from the description box below. Your comments and feedback help us improve and create better content for aspirants every day. Thank you for supporting AI Podcast. Keep questioning the bigger picture, keep looking for those hidden connections, and we will catch you next time.